Hello, my name is Ibrokhim Rakhimov, and today we will talk about crisis communication failures in British Petroleum. Let's talk about British Petroleum Company. The history of BP began in 1098 when, after a long and exhausted search, oil was discovered in Persia. This discovery laid the foundation for the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, which later became BP. The potential of the new company was actively discussed in the press, and when its shares began to be listed on the stock exchanges of the years. London and Glasgow people lined up to buy shares, despite a promising start. In 1914, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company was on the verge of the bankruptcy, with significant oil reserves. The company experienced sales difficulties. Cars at the time were considered a luxury. The fuel market was at the time were considered luxury. The fuel market was in its infancy, and industrial oil market was already divided between European and American companies. At this stage, Winston Churchill played a huge role in the fate of the company, who considered oil to be strategically important resource necessary for maintaining the economic power of Great Britain. Churchill convinced the cabinet that in order ensures access a reliable supply of oil at a responsible price level, the government must own or at least control the sources of much of the oil needed. It was agreed that the government itself would become a shareholder in Anglo-Persian Company, which would act as a protector of Britain's national interests in the world oil market. Moving to the next point, we'll talk about the sale of company shares. In 1987, the British government sold the last stake in BP. Since becoming a wholly private company, BP has streamlined its business and divested itself of non-core assets, concentrating on its core business of exploration and production of oil and gas, oil refining and transportation, and others. In the late 1990s, fierce competition in the energy sector set off a wave mergers and acquisitions. On the shareholders, the new millennium humanity is facing the new challenges. Scientists have proven that climate change poses a serious threat to the future of the planet. In 1997, BP chief executive John Brown said that company must find a compromise between further development and the need to protect the environment. Lord Brown was the first major energy executive to recognize that global warming is a threat on the global scale, and to say that that his company must be involved in tackling the problem. In the next part, we will talk about the war, which is changed the fate of the company. Everything changed in the autumn of 1939 when Great Britain entered the World War II. The government came to the conclusion that in a war all competition should be excluded, so entire British oil industry will operate within the framework of one great giant concern under the auspices of the state. This concern also included the Anglo-Iranian Company. All gasoline produced by the concern was sold under the name pool. National interests took precedence over business interests, and BP's sales growth the continental Europe declined sharply. During the post-war reconstruction of Europe, the Anglo-Iranian company began to improve. It invested in factories in France, Germany, and Italy, and in other companies of Europe. But the fragile balance in the world soon cracked because of the crisis in the Middle East. Anti-British sentiment intensified in Iran. So, in the 1951, the Prime Minister of Iran persuaded Parliament to nationalize the oil industry, after which the Anglo-Iranian company's refinery in Abadan was closed and British employees left Iran. This path turned out to be dead for Iran. Many countries boycotted Iranian oil supplies, and the economic situation in the country only worsened. For 2 years, oil was not profitable, inflation was rampant. The country's situation became much worse than before the nationalization of the oil industry. This led to the removal of the prime minister and change of power in 1952. When the parties returned to the negotiating table, an agreement was reached on the creation of a consortium of Western companies with the aim of doing business in Iran. The share of the Anglo-Iranian company was 40%. So in the next point, we will talk about the financial crisis of this company. Government investment helped the company overcome the financial crisis. The crisis world war marked a new page in the history of the Anglo-Persian company. The head of the company, Charles Greenway, pursued a special goal to transform the enterprise from a supplier of crude oil into a full-cycle oil company. At the height of the war, Greenway was already able to prepare company for post-war competition. In 1917, he purchased one of the largest fuel distribution networks in the United Kingdom, British Petroleum, from the British government. Contrary to the name, it belonged to Dutch Bank, which in England sold its oil from Romania throughout it. When the war broke out, the British government took over the management of this German property with the acquisition of British Petroleum. The Anglo-Persian company received not only an advanced market system but also a trade name. The company also developed its tanker fleet. So in the last page we will talk about the biggest crisis in the history of the company. In 2010, BP had a hard test. On April 20, 2010, 80 kilometers of the coasts of Louisiana in the Gulf of Mexico, the Deepwater Horizon oil platform exploded, an accident that occurred and eventually developed into a man-made disaster. First of a local, then of a regional scale, with a negative consequences for the ecosystem of the region for many decades to come. The spill in the Gulf of Mexico has become one of the largest man-made disasters in world history in terms of its negative impact on the ecological situation. At the moment, it's recognized as the largest oil spill into the open ocean in the history of the United States and probably in the history of the world. The 965 kilometer oil slick approached about 34 kilometers off the coast of Louisiana, endangering beaches and fishing areas that are critical to the economy of the coast states. It's estimated that up to 5,000 barrels, about 700 tons or 795 liters of oil per day were spilled into the water in the Gulf of Mexico. So as a result of the oil, more than 171 miles of coastline in the states of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida were contaminated. Over 57,000 miles of the Bay Area. It will be about 24% of the area under U.S. jurisdiction are close to finishing activities. Enormous damage has been done to finishing and tourism activities in the region. Major response operations were performed by Discover Enterprises, drill ship, and the Q4000 multi-purpose submersible platform at the scene. So that's all in my presentation. Thank you for your attention.